What happened that night shocked an entire community. But the clues were always there, hiding in plain sight. Sometimes, the dead don't speak. But the scene they leave behind? It screams. Before we unravel the truth, take a moment to subscribe, give this video a like if you're already hooked, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What's the one detail you think most people overlook in a crime scene? On June 4, 2023, the quiet suburb of Wilton, Connecticut, was interrupted by something it wasn't used to. Flashing red and blue lights, the echo of emergency sirens, and the kind of silence that follows chaos. The kind that weighs heavy in the air. A safe, affluent neighborhood built on routine, appearances, and predictability suddenly became the epicenter of a chilling mystery. The house at the center of it all belonged to Dr. Peter Landon, a 52-year-old trauma surgeon at Norwalk Hospital. Widely respected, deeply private, and seemingly flawless in the eyes of neighbors, Peter had lived at 38 Sycamore Lane for nearly 12 years. The colonial-style home, trimmed in pristine white with deep navy shutters, looked like something off a postcard. It had the signature manicured lawn, a backyard shaded by old oak trees, and a two-car garage that always held the same black Audi and champagne-colored Lexus. Peter lived alone. His wife, Marissa, died in a car accident nearly 6 years earlier. Since then, he kept mostly to himself, filling his time with long hospital shifts, occasional charity events, and quiet dinners alone at a local Italian place down the road. To outsiders, he was a man carrying grief gracefully, a picture of composure and discipline. But inside the house, things weren't quite so tidy. A neighbor, Ellen Marks, had occasionally noticed odd sounds. A faint argument through the open kitchen windows, someone pacing loudly late into the night. She assumed it was the stress of the job. He was a good man, quiet, kept to himself, she would later say in an interview. But you can always tell when something's a little off. 2 weeks before the incident, Peter's younger brother, Thomas Landon, a 47-year-old financial advisor, had been staying in the guest room. The brothers were known to be close, or at least they had been once. Their relationship had grown tense in recent years, largely due to disputes over their late parents' estate and Thomas's frequent financial troubles. Friends of the family noted a falling out in 2021 that led to nearly a year of silence between the two. That they were suddenly back in contact raised eyebrows. According to Thomas, he'd come to visit for a reset, a chance to clear his head, maybe even mend some fences. But according to others, like Peter's longtime colleague, Dr. Alison Greer, Thomas had shown up unannounced and had been drinking heavily in recent weeks. Peter didn't like confrontation, she said, but you could tell he was stressed. More than usual. The night of June 4th began like any other. Calm, uneventful, unremarkable. Security camera footage from a neighbor's Ring doorbell shows Peter returning home from work around 7:42 p.m., carrying a brown paper bag believed to be takeout. The footage also captures Thomas stepping out onto the porch roughly 15 minutes later, speaking into his phone. That call was later confirmed to be a heated conversation with his ex-wife, which lasted nearly 20 minutes. Then, things started to shift. At approximately 9:03 p.m., the same camera recorded a strange flicker of lights from inside the Landon home, almost like a brief power surge. Moments later, a car that had been parked down the street began to roll slowly forward before reversing and pulling out of view. No one in the neighborhood recognized it. Another neighbor, Rachel Kim, heard what she described as a sharp bang, like something heavy falling around 9:15. She paused the movie she was watching but didn't think much of it at the time. It wasn't until hours later, when police filled the street, that she realized she may have heard the sound of someone's final moments. At 9:26 p.m., a 911 call was placed from inside the Landon residence. The voice on the line was panicked, slurred, and almost unintelligible. Emergency services traced the call but couldn't get a clear description of what had occurred. Dispatch records noted possible domestic disturbance and unknown injury, potential unconscious male. Police arrived at 9:34 p.m. The front door was unlocked. The lights in the foyer were on, but flickering slightly. Evidence later pointed to tampering with the breaker panel. In the living room, they found Peter Landon collapsed near the bottom of the staircase, with a deep laceration across the back of his head. His watch was missing, though his wallet and phone were still in his pocket. There was blood on the banister and a shattered glass tumbler at the foot of the stairs. But there were signs of more than just a fall. A struggle, a broken lamp in the study, scratches on the floor, as if someone had tried to push or drag something. And in the guest bathroom, a wet towel that later tested positive for traces of Peter's blood, as though someone had attempted to clean up. Thomas Landon was found sitting on the edge of the guest bed, staring blankly at the wall. When officers entered, he reportedly said, "I didn't mean to. It wasn't supposed to happen like that." Toxicology reports would later confirm Thomas was under the influence of both alcohol and benzodiazepines. He was arrested on the spot for suspicion of assault, later upgraded to manslaughter. But the truth was far more layered. By the time authorities arrived, the crime scene had already started telling its story. The question was, would anyone listen? What really happened that night? What caused a respected surgeon and a troubled brother to become the center of a homicide investigation? The clues were scattered, some in plain sight, others buried beneath years of resentment. In the next part of this investigation, we go behind the yellow tape, into the forensic work, the subtle evidence, and the moment when investigators realized something didn't add up. Stay with us. When investigators arrived at the Landon residence, they were faced with more than just the crime scene. They were dealing with a house that was more than a home. It was a carefully curated image, hiding years of family secrets beneath its pristine exterior. At first glance, the scene was chaotic, but there was a method to it, a story in the way things were displaced. Every room told a different part of the narrative. The living room, where Peter was found near the stairs, was a blend of order and disarray. The furniture was arranged neatly, but the broken glass and blood splatter marked something far darker. The scene felt like a carefully staged performance gone horribly wrong. Detective Marcus Langley, a seasoned investigator known for his sharp eye for detail, was the first to enter the house. He was calm, methodical, exactly the kind of presence the case needed. As he walked through the house, his sharp eyes immediately honed in on the small inconsistencies. The faint traces of blood leading to the bathroom, the wet towel left on the floor, and the absence of Peter's watch. In cases like this, it wasn't just about what was left behind. It was about what was missing. "I've seen this before," Langley muttered to himself, crouching near the broken lamp in the study. The force used to break the lamp was deliberate. Someone had been angry. He stood and looked toward the kitchen, where signs of a struggle were even more evident. A chair tipped over, a knife left carelessly on the counter, its blade stained with something that didn't match the victim's blood type. This wasn't an accident. It was personal. The first piece of the puzzle was the missing watch. Peter Landon's Rolex had been a symbol of his success, something he wore every day. But now it was gone. And in its place, the clear signs of a robbery that wasn't meant to be one. "You don't just rob someone of their watch when there's so much else to take," Langley said to his partner, Detective Linda Reyes, as they surveyed the scene. Someone knew Peter, and whoever did this wasn't trying to just steal. It was something deeper. Back at the scene of the crime, Thomas Landon was sitting silently on the guest bed, still in shock. His clothes were disheveled, and he appeared almost lost in his own thoughts. Langley knew the signs of someone in shock, but something about Thomas didn't sit right. He wasn't as broken as one might expect, given the circumstances. It wasn't grief that seemed to cloud his face, it was guilt. The moment Langley and Reyes approached Thomas, his hands trembled. He barely acknowledged them at first, staring at the floor as if he was contemplating something. Langley knelt down to his level, his gaze steady. "Thomas, you need to tell us what happened. You're not just a witness anymore. You're a suspect." Thomas didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked up slowly, his eyes bloodshot, his voice thick with a mix of shame and confusion. "I didn't mean for it to happen," Thomas said quietly. "We were arguing. I was angry. Peter, he just wasn't himself lately. He changed. I tried to get him to see reason, but he wouldn't listen. I just wanted him to understand." Langley pressed for more details, trying to piece together the exact events of the evening. Thomas spoke in disjointed sentences, revealing bits and pieces of a conversation that had spiraled out of control. According to Thomas, the argument started when he confronted Peter about his increasing distance from the family, particularly after the death of their parents. Peter had always been the golden child, the one who was perfect, the one who had it all together. But in recent months, that facade had begun to crack. The argument started over money, Thomas explained. And then it became more personal. We started talking about Marissa, his wife, the one who died. It was like Peter was shutting down. I didn't know how to reach him anymore. That's when I snapped. According to Thomas, things escalated when Peter refused to apologize for their previous argument, one that had started weeks ago over an inheritance dispute. But what Thomas didn't expect was how the confrontation would end. He didn't want me there anymore, Thomas continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I was trying to help him. He threw me out. I was just trying to get him to listen. At this point, Langley knew the story didn't add up. If Thomas had truly wanted to help, why would he be so calm about the situation now? And why would he leave out key details about what had happened that night? Langley needed to dig deeper to find out what was hidden beneath the surface. While Thomas sat in interrogation, Reyes and the rest of the team were gathering evidence from the house. The blood found in the guest bathroom, initially thought to be Peter's, didn't match his type, it matched Thomas's. This was a critical development. The wet towel that had been carelessly discarded was now a crucial piece of evidence. The bloody knife found on the kitchen counter, it wasn't Peter's blood, it was Thomas's. A cut from the struggle was starting to look less like an accident and more like an act of revenge. The toxicology report also came back. Peter Landon had been heavily sedated when he was attacked. His blood showed traces of benzodiazepines, medications typically prescribed for anxiety or insomnia. Peter had never been prescribed these medications, but Thomas had. The missing watch was another clue that kept Langley up at night. Watches were personal items, symbols of wealth, status, and pride. Why would someone go to such lengths to steal it? Could it be connected to a deeper motive? Was it a crime of passion or something else? Back at the station, Langley pored over the reports. He felt like he was missing something small but significant. And then it hit him. Thomas had been in a deep financial hole for years. He was in debt, facing a series of poor investments, and had been trying to get his hands on Peter's share of their late parents' estate. Perhaps Peter's refusal to bail him out that night was the final straw. As the investigation deepened, one of the most unsettling details came to light. Surveillance footage from the night of the incident revealed that Thomas had been in contact with a third party just before the argument escalated. The conversation, though unintelligible, was traced back to a man named Charles Evans, someone Thomas had worked with in the past, a man with a criminal background who was known for using intimidation to get what he wanted. Langley knew that this was a key lead, one that could change everything. As the pieces started to fall into place, the shocking reality of what had happened that night began to emerge. Peter had been a man caught between family loyalty and his own success, and his brother, Thomas, had been driven by desperation. But it was the third party, the shadow behind the curtains, who might just. What really happened that night? Was Thomas simply a victim of his own emotions? Or was there something more sinister at play? The investigation was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. As the investigation reached its climax, Detective Marcus Langley felt the weight of the case bearing down on him. Everything was connected, the pieces were all in place, but the final puzzle piece remained elusive. The question lingered in the air. Who was truly responsible for Peter Landon's death? Was it Thomas, the desperate brother with financial motives? Or was there a third party pulling the strings from the shadows? It wasn't until Langley revisited the forensic evidence that everything clicked. Thomas's blood had been found in the guest bathroom, which was now understood to be a result of a heated argument. Yet the deeper layers of the case suggested more. The sedative found in Peter's system, a drug traceable to Charles Evans, raised red flags. Evans, a man with known ties to the criminal underworld, had a motive that was as personal as it was financial. But why would he be involved? The answer wasn't just about the inheritance. It was about power, control, and something darker, more sinister than anyone had anticipated. Langley met with a financial investigator who had uncovered records showing that Charles Evans had been heavily involved in Peter Landon's business dealings. Despite being out of the public eye, Evans had been secretly funneling money through Peter's accounts, using his own brother, Thomas, as a way to get close to Peter. Thomas had been the perfect pawn, desperate, financially unstable, and willing to do anything to fix his debts. But Peter's refusal to give him the financial help he needed had pushed Thomas to the breaking point. The final confrontation had not only been about the inheritance, but about Thomas's fear of losing control of his own future. And Charles Evans had been a constant presence in the background, a figure who had subtly manipulated Thomas into believing that taking Peter out of the equation would solve all his problems. Evans had promised that with Peter out of the way, the money would flow, and Thomas could escape the debt that was suffocating him. Langley couldn't help but marvel at the manipulation. Evans had played Thomas like a puppet, using his insecurities and desperation to execute a cold-blooded plan. But there was one crucial question left unanswered. Did Thomas pull the trigger, or was Evans the one who committed the murder himself? Langley had to confront Thomas one last time. The lies were unraveling fast, and there was no more room for excuses. When Thomas entered the interrogation room, he knew something had changed. He could feel the pressure in the air. Langley stood across from him, his gaze unwavering. "Thomas, this is your last chance," Langley said quietly, leaning forward. "The truth will come out, and you're not going to walk away from this unscathed. So I'll ask you again, who killed Peter?" For a long moment, Thomas sat silently, his eyes darting to the floor. He seemed to shrink under Langley's gaze, as though the weight of his guilt was finally catching up with him. I didn't mean to kill him," Thomas whispered, his voice cracking. "It wasn't supposed to go that far. I was angry. We were fighting, and then, I just wanted him to understand. I wasn't going to hurt him. But when the argument escalated, I snapped." Langley remained quiet, allowing the silence to hang in the air, pushing Thomas to confess. Finally, Thomas spoke again, his words coming out in a rush. "I never meant for Charles to get involved. I thought I could fix things. But Peter kept refusing to help. And then Charles, he just made me think it was the only way out. But I wasn't the one who killed him. I swear, I didn't." Thomas's words sent a chill down Langley's spine. He knew what this meant. The third party, Charles Evans, had played a direct role in the murder. Langley's instincts told him this wasn't a simple crime of passion. No, this was far more calculated. And Evans had masterminded it from the shadows. Langley knew he had to bring Evans in. The man had been lurking in the background, always one step ahead of the investigation, covering his tracks. But the evidence was stacking up, and it was only a matter of time before his involvement would be exposed. The breakthrough came when Langley discovered a hidden recording on Peter's phone. It was a voice memo from the night of the murder. In it, Peter could be heard arguing with both Thomas and Charles Evans. The recording was damning. Peter had realized too late that his brother and Evans had been in this together. "Thomas," Peter's voice echoed through the recording, trembling with disbelief. "You're working with him? You're really doing this? This is insane. You can't just..." The recording cut off abruptly, but not before a muffled sound echoed in the background. Langley's heart sank as the pieces fell into place. The evidence pointed directly to Evans. He had orchestrated the entire thing, using Thomas's financial desperation to manipulate him into a violent confrontation with Peter. When Peter refused to hand over control, Evans had taken matters into his own hands. It was clear now, Charles Evans had been the true mastermind, but Thomas had been the one who pulled the trigger in a moment of blind rage and fear. Evans had never intended for Thomas to be the one to take the fall, but he had used him as a pawn in a much larger scheme. With the evidence now undeniable, Langley's team moved quickly to arrest Charles Evans. They found him at a secluded property outside the city, where he had been lying low, confident that his involvement had remained undetected. When Evans was brought in for questioning, Langley wasted no time. The man had been a master manipulator, but now, with the full weight of the investigation closing in, Evans's arrogance began to fade. "I didn't kill him," Evans spat, a cold smirk curling at his lips. "But I sure as hell made sure it happened." Langley's gaze hardened. "You may not have pulled the trigger, but you were the one pulling the strings. You manipulated Thomas into committing murder for your own gain. And now, you'll answer for it." Evans's smirk faltered as the reality of his situation set in. He knew the game was over. With Evans in custody and the truth revealed, the Landon family was left to pick up the pieces. Thomas, once the golden child of the family, was now a convicted murderer. And Peter, the man who had seemed so untouchable in life, was gone forever. But the pain didn't end there. Marissa, Peter's wife, was devastated. Her world turned upside down as she tried to process the betrayal of her brother-in-law and the loss of her husband. The community, once shocked by the brutality of the murder, was now left to mourn the fractured family that had once seemed so perfect. As for Langley, he knew the case wasn't just about finding the murderer, it was about uncovering the layers of deceit and manipulation that had destroyed a family. Justice had been served, but it came at a heavy cost. And for those involved, the scars would last long after the case had closed. This was the shocking truth of what really happened that night. The murder was just the beginning of a deeper story about greed, betrayal, and the lengths people would go to for power. If you've been following along, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another twist in these stories. And as always, leave a comment below. What do you think of the outcome? Let us know your thoughts.